Welcome to Tani's Tax Consulting YouTube series. This is the second broadcast. Today we will be discussing some of the issues that's troubling taxpayers with regards to e-invoicing. Let me firstly introduce Sangeetha, our director, who is in charge of our income tax advisory practice, and she looks after all the e-invoicing projects. First, let's deal with staff claims. How do we actually deal with it in e-invoicing? It's very common for staff to put in claims because in the course of carrying out their work, they're bound to incur expenses. Maybe Sangeetha, I'll just ask you the first question is, how do we deal with staff claims, which may be personal in nature or incurred for the company?
Under the e-invoicing rules, staff claims, they have actually divided into two types of staff claims. Basically, employment perquisites and benefits that you are entitled to can give rise to the staff claims. For example, like your club memberships, professional subscriptions, or any other expenses that you incur and you are entitled to under the employer's policy. Second type of expenses that could give rise to staff claims are the expenses that you incur on behalf of the company, and you put in the claim to get it reimbursed from the company. The original rules as per the guideline is that whenever your staff put in the staff claims, you must have an e-invoice under the employer's name. So that is the rules. But because LHDN or the IRB realized that you might face some difficulties in getting the invoices in the employer's name, so they have given some concession. So the concession is that the employees can put in the claims under the employee's name. So the e-invoice can be in the name of the staff. The second one, in case they couldn't get the e-invoice because perhaps the suppliers or the vendors could be exempted from e-invoicing, they still can use normal receipts or invoices. This concession will only be applicable if, for example, for the perquisites and benefits, it must be stated clearly in your employer's policy or handbook. So there must be some update or changes needs to be done to the employer's policy to make sure all the benefits and perquisites are clearly stated there. Secondly, for expenses incurred on behalf of the company must be able to show the process to prove that the employees have incurred those expenses on behalf of the company. So if you can fulfill this, your normal procedure of submitting staff claims using the invoices under the employee's name can continue.
That's the important thing. So employees actually can get it in their own name and still, get reimbursed, and you can still issue the e-invoices, right?
Yeah.
The other troubling matter is really directors. How do we deal with directors' fees? There are two types of directors. Directors who are employed as employees and directors who actually are not employed as employees but who are actually independent, for example, and they are not employees of the company. How do we deal with their fees? And quite often they're given attendance allowances or travel allowances. How do we deal with it in the e-invoicing system?
Let's deal with the easy one first, which is the directors who is employed by the company. So basically they have an employment contract. So we call it contract of service. Basically, if you have an employment contract, it's easy because the fees will form part and parcel of your employment income, so e-invoice is not required there. But like Ms. Tani mentioned, the independent director who do not have a contract of employment, so we will treat that as contract for service. So in that case, the director needs to issue an e-invoice for the fees and allowances he earns, provided the director earns more than 150,000 per year. If it is less than 150,000 per year, again it is exempted, and for both the situation that I mentioned just now, there is no self-billing requirement from the company.
It's the director who has to issue the invoice, and remember, if you've got directorships in 5 different companies, you've got to add them up. The 150,000 will be a sum total of all that. So if you exceed from the 5 directorships from 5 different companies, the more than 150,000, then he has to issue an e-invoice, and he can do that from
My Invoice portal.
It's a My Invoice portal.
Yes.
He has to issue the invoices. You can't escape that. So all directors, you have to be reminded that you have to issue the invoice to the company. The next issue of concern is intercompany transactions. There are lots and lots of intercompany. You've got management fees, you've got sale of goods, you've got everything. Now, in the past, or in many cases, they may be just journalizing in one company, and then the other company also similarly journalizes. No invoices are issued. Now with the e-invoicing, how do you deal with it, Sangeetha?
Okay, For all intercompany transactions, like any other commercial transaction, you need e-invoice. So your past practices like simply passing a journal entry or by issuing a credit note, debit note, no longer acceptable under the e-invoicing regime. So you can only issue a credit note and debit note whenever there is an original e-invoice. So whenever there is a transaction with intercompany, the simple answer is you have to issue an e-invoice. If you are making payment to any related parties who is situated outside Malaysia, make sure you must now issue a self-billed e-invoice like any other transaction with foreign vendor and supplier. One more important thing is for interest payment, it's quite unique. Interest payment to any intercompany, be it a local intercompany or foreign intercompany, you need a self-billed e-invoice. Even though the other party is capable of issuing an e-invoice to you, but if you're making the payment, interest payment, the payer have to issue a self-billed e-invoice.
So it's important to note, interest payments, you have this, you have to issue a self-billed invoice. The other point is when you're receiving services from an intercompany which is overseas, you need to do a self-billed invoice. And for the services and goods that you export, you also need to issue a normal e-invoice.
Yes.
So remember that. So that's intercompany transactions. So ladies and gentlemen, that's about it for the moment. I hope it's helpful to you. Thanks, Sangeetha. Thank you very much. Thank you.